Crumble is a small indie game and it's also a British dish. So, just be aware that you have to write game in front of Crumble when doing your Google search. But the reason for the name Crumble comes from the level design of this game, given its gimmick of having physics-based platforming. By this I mean some of the platforms have physics to them, so to say. And in this game, that comes to work in a few ways. But first, let me explain the premise of Crumble. The best way I found to describe it is, Crumble is a mix of Sonic and Spider-Man, given the small blue ball you play as has a very similar movement to Sonic, being that he can be slow for platforming but also can go fast. And also the aesthetics of the levels are very reminiscent of the Sonic levels. And Spider-Man because, well, there is a swinging mechanic with its tongue. There really isn't a story to Crumble and it doesn't need to. I think Crumble is really good at creating a zen state of playing the game, especially when you're going really fast. Crumble has two distinct pieces of gameplay. There is the slower parts that have a focus on more precise platforming, and the faster parts, there is still platforming but it's a bigger focus on maintaining speed. Crumble is heavy and carries a lot of memento, which works for the fastest parts of the level, but the slower ones can be very hit or miss. Also for me, it can be a bit jarring going from the faster parts of the level to sudden stops. This can also be a problem when you get hit or you hit something in such a way that stops your memento, and while there should be some level of difficulty to the game, it can also feel this game's level design wasn't ready for you to be going slow in certain spots. For example, in the level where you are jumping between snakes at high speeds, these snakes move around and roll around and it makes it really hard to gain speed back up, making the whole level a bit of a chore if you don't make it perfectly. Now, it's understandable that a studio's first game has some rough level designs, but that's not the reason I forgive some of the shortcomings of this game, but more because some of these shortcomings come from a choice to make this game a lot more free-feeling than your modern 3D Sonic game, with no invisible walls or having that feeling that you don't really have control over what's going on. Crumble feels very responsive, and because of its tongue-swinging Spider-Man-like feature, it also meant this freedom doesn't become such a huge encumbrance on the pace of the level, because falling off a ledge doesn't mean a restart. This is also where the physics platforming I mentioned earlier comes to play. It can serve to keep that swinging in check, as not to become a move you overly rely on, given swinging on a physics object usually means pulling on it, and that meaning it will probably fall. But also a more skilled player also would be able to swing off it. The other main way the physics objects are used is when they're being blasted off as you try to platform them. This serves to create some unique and fairly enjoyable set pieces in the slower side of the game. But there is also physics objects in this fast-paced side of the gameplay. Things like ropes and wobbly bridges and even tree branches all count as being physics objects. But also some of those destruction set pieces exist here, taking place in a sort of Matrix slow motion thing. Given that if they move at regular speed, it would be pretty impossible to platform on them, but this only happens a handful of times. But regardless, it's still good and it adds to what for me is the most enjoyable part of the game, which is going fast and just gliding along, seeing the levels fly past you. And this also shows another problem with the game, which is the levels don't feel made for the speed you can achieve. Very often did I find myself overdoing jumps, not only missing the next platform, but the one after that as well. But this also adds something to the game, as wanting to try and make it at these exaggerated speeds is a challenge onto itself for the player. Regardless of all that though, Crumble is not a very long game. I beat it in about 2 hours and it just kinda came and went. Graphics wise, it looks fine, again very reminiscent of Sonic games. and there's a very literal fresh feeling to it, as most of the levels take place up in the clouds, but there just isn't a big variety of locations, which definitely isn't helped by the shortness of the game. And soundtrack wise, it's also fine. It can definitely go under the radar, being mostly piano tracks. It's not bad, but it definitely feels like it's just passable, to me at least. Regardless though, I hope this didn't come off awfully critical of this game, because I do think when it works that it is something special and I really find it enjoyable. And for me, I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. Recommendations wise, though, it is a bit hard to recommend, mostly because it is only 2 hours, but it's also $15, so you have to judge and see if that's something that's worth it for you. It isn't the worst deal ever, but personally I would rather wait for a sale for it to go under 10, where I would feel much more comfortable recommending it, because I don't think there's much to do here after those 2 hours, unless you enjoy leaderboard and doing better times. But for me, that's not really an incentive, so I don't see much replayability here. Regardless of your decision though, I hope you enjoyed this video, and please consider subscribing and liking. Both of those are free things you can do, and regardless of what you do, well, goodbye.